Hi, I'm Professor James Chappell, and I'm offering a new course this spring called The History of Human Rights. This will be a lecture course in the history department and will also count as a history elective for the public policy major. It's a new course, and it's also an exciting course because the history of human rights is in many ways a history of our own moral consciousness. Even if we don't use the phrase, we assume without thinking that human beings have certain inalienable rights against things like torture or discrimination. But why do we think that? Where did these ideas come from? The notion of human rights, it turns out, is not that old, at least the way we use the term today. So as we examine the history of human rights in this course, we not only learn a very interesting story, we learn how to apply the tools of historical analysis to our own most cherished concepts. We too are historical to the cores of our beings. But human rights are not only a moral sensibility or a philosophical framework, it's also a discourse that underwrites a certain kind of practice, most notably military or humanitarian intervention around the globe in the name of human rights. So this course has a dual task: to think intellectually about the many sources of human rights, and also to think legally and politically about how human rights become embedded in international law, governments, and NGOs. There will be about 75 pages of reading per week from an interesting array of sources. There will be a midterm and a final exam, and you'll be responsible for several short written assignments. I'll give a brief overview of how the course will be structured. It has a broad sweep, in fact covering ideas of human rights from Plato all the way to Amnesty International. We'll begin in ancient times to understand political thought before the advent of rights. We'll then work our way slowly through the medieval and early modern period, trying to understand the origin of natural rights as a concept, as well as the notion of humanity, which then becomes the bearer of those rights. We'll then discuss the age of revolutions and the various bills of rights that come out in the late 18th century. And these ideas had many sources. We'll discuss philosophical and legal sources, but also literary sources to understand the history of emotions. We'll explore the various reasons why people begin for the first time to truly care about the suffering of others, even people they can't see, even people an ocean away. We'll then discuss the abolitionist movement and the first attempts to write a law of war in the 19th century, before finally arriving at the UN Declaration of Human Rights in 1948 and the modern human rights movement in the last several decades. The hope is that by the end, students will learn to think historically about the concepts that we see thrown about in public discourse all the time. The goal is not for students to become critical of human rights, but to think critically about human rights. Now, if anyone has any questions, they can feel free to email me at james.chappell@duke.edu, and I look forward to seeing some of you in the spring.